Hi, Paul. It's great to have you on the Fintech Frontier podcast today. I really enjoyed learning about your background. Fascinating how your journey has taken you from being a classical guitarist to becoming a passionate sustainability advocate and data entrepreneur. I'd love to hear more about what inspired that transition and how your personal interest in sustainability issues led you to found Oxari and start applying data science and AI to tackle real-world environmental challenges. Can you tell me what were some of the key moments or realizations that made you decide to pivot your career into this direction?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on the pod. I really appreciate it. Glad to be here. Looking back, of course, there are always some key moments, some transitional points. I think going back, the first would be living in Spain. That was still during my studies of guitar. I was focusing on playing flamenco at that time. And
Nice.
then this was around 2000 to 2014, 15. So lived in Seville, and I really felt the severeness of the financial crisis, right? You could really feel it everywhere in southern Spain. People suffered a lot economically. And that was the point where I really started to ask myself, okay, how did this happen? Why? Because in Germany, to be honest, in my normal life, financial crisis, heard about it, but never really affected me. And there I got to know friends who told me, okay, like this really changed everything, right? Everybody went away, parents lost their jobs and so on. But long story short, that's why I really started to be interested in economics. And then I finished my bachelor's in guitar, and I moved on to sustainable finance, where I then learned more about, well, what's the impact of climate change on the economy and especially on businesses. And I started to work with ESG data really from the start. So during my bachelor's and then later in my master's, where I studied banking and finance, I always worked with sustainability data. Then I worked with Rabobank, and I did some research on how you could construct investment portfolios really going into long positions for green companies. How would that affect your portfolio performance in matters of adjusted returns? And well, this really led me to always look at sustainability and corporate sustainability from a data standpoint. And then during my studies, I got to know my current co-founders. And after we finished our masters, we said, okay, well, let's found a company. We got some support from the university. We all studied in Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Beautiful. And we really started just 4 guys with the laptops. And a couple of years later, we're here. I'm proud to say that I think we achieved a lot.
Great. And so tell me, where is Oxari now, 2 years into the journey? Can you give me an idea of who are your customers and what are the real life problems that you're solving for your clients?
So we basically have 2 parts of the company. One is really focusing on delivering big data and AI solutions to more customized projects with our clients. And one is focusing on scalable solutions that mainly entail data sustainability, corporate data extraction, collection, harmonization, and analysis, and build scalable platforms for that. So this is really the two main pillars on that the company is built. And we are a team of 10 people right now, and the clients are mainly coming from the financial industry. Mm-hmm. The banks, investment funds, but all with a kind of like a sustainable investment lens. And
yes,
but as well some consultancy firms that use our data solutions, or even NGOs. We work with a very interesting NGO from the U.S. So it's really a very broad audience, so to say.
Okay, and the common thing that they're looking for from you is that they want well-ordered data to underpin their decisions and their reporting, or? Could you give me some insights into that?
Of course. Let's maybe talk about two examples, right? So we serve an impact investment fund from Boston. They're called Global Data Capital. We work with them since a couple of years. And, well, they invest mainly in emerging markets. And if you want to invest in stocks in emerging markets and you, well, purchase carbon data, so ESG data from, well, the big data providers, you will have a data coverage of maybe 30-40%, right? And what do you do with the rest? We developed a machine learning solution that basically takes in financial data about companies and is able to estimate the scope 1, 2, 3, so the carbon emissions of these companies. So we trained on a very big data set. We trained these algorithms to understand the patterns between financial data and emission data, and then they basically run their whole portfolio on our API. So they basically send the financial data that they have on all these companies to our API, access our machine learning models. They do the estimates of the carbon emissions and give them back, and they can basically construct their investment portfolios using that solution. And another example is the NGO that we talked about, that I mentioned in the US. They have the target to replace gasoline on US American streets. It sounds crazy, but well, that's the target, right? Going to net zero. And they came really from a more policy and equality side of things. And then we started to really dig into data, which is a lot of different data sets about how people move, trips, like GPS data, insurance data, and understand who are the people that actually use gasoline. Okay, and we found that only 10% of the people in the US use 30% of the gas of the fuel, right? That's more than whole China uses in a year, right? So this is a huge environmental impact. They drive crazy distances in very big cars, and well, burn a lot of fuel. And then we basically thought about brought this forward in several states, like Vermont. They actually changed the policies based on the data work that we did, and raising awareness, right? So these are two examples of the work, but I think it's becoming clear that we're really focusing on climate change related topics and how we can kind of deliver new insights and new data and intelligence, basically applying modern big data science solutions to actual real world problems, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, well, it sounds fascinating what you're doing. Like the first example where you're able to calculate the carbon emissions based on the profit and loss and the balance sheets or the financial reports of a company. That's great. And like then the reporting on the emissions in different sectors in the US. Now, one thing that comes to mind now is the way is, with the political changes in the administration, I know that ESG is a four-lettered word in the US these days. And also I see that even in the European Union, that there's been a kind of a populist right-wing resurgence. So I'm just curious, do you see some change in the environment with regards to ESG, or is it more that investors are looking to really get concrete evidence that companies are doing what they're saying they're doing? Probably two questions there, though.
Very, very big question, important questions, Stephen. So the environment is changing twofold. That's I think you put this very beautifully, and I think this is already the answer to the question. Look, of course, there's populist movement. The ESG is a framework that's getting a lot of bashes. We see a lot of outflows of funds, ESG related funds. That's all something that I would call a short-term sentiment. And I'll explain you why. In the end, the financial market has to be rational. And we see that the climate change will impact every part of our global economy, right? So there won't be a single company that's not affected by by climate change. So if you are a rational investor, you need to consider this. Right? There was just an article in Guardian that I saw a couple of weeks ago about a board member of Allianz, which is a big insurer, right? And he basically said, okay, we are risking capitalism because the impact of climate change will be so big that, for instance, we as insurers, the premiums will getting so high that if we want to insure something, that the people are not going to be able to pay for it. A house somewhere in Germany where there's flood risk, right? That's just one example of millions, really, right? So what I'm trying to say here,
uninsured with the big fires over there, right?
exactly. So what I'm trying to say here is, even if there is this current populist pushback on sustainability and sustainable investment, that doesn't make the problem go away. So, and if I'm managing assets for my clients, I need to implement these data and this information into my financial models, because if I'm not going to do that, I'm going to lose money. So there's an inherent very big incentive for everybody who's managing money to use this data, to understand this data and understand the impact of big changes, environmental changes on our assets.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there may have been some irrational exuberance in the clean energy or green energy sector, and that we saw companies like BP, British Petroleum, some years ago, they decided to invest heavily in that sector to diversify their portfolio. But now they're getting shareholder revolts as the value of the companies drop, because the return on investment from, say, wind turbines or solar power were not on par with gas or petroleum. So they've kind of had to retrench and focus. But I think, the sort of innovations that you're doing, which is providing, using cutting edge technology to provide data to investors about what's actually happening, can help the the sustainability or the ESG movement to become more pragmatic and more realistic, and also to be able to make promises that are founded in solid data, and ones that they have got a chance to keep those promises, because that's where trust will build in them, I would have thought.
That's absolutely right. And I mean, as a company, we don't make the decision, right? As a businessman, of course, we do decisions that affect our employees and our stakeholders, right? But in the end, we can only try to give new insights to, well, let's say the policymakers, and as well, companies like BP. I know they're pulling back right now on investments on renewable, but I mean, these things are always cyclical, right? And it might be that this changes in 5 years ago. Sorry, in 5 years again.
Yes.
I really think we can only you cannot manage what you don't measure, right? So that's
yes. Exactly.
I'm convinced that we have to measure as much as possible, understand as much as possible, and then we can try to find solutions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm seeing it across fintechs that, for example, we're working with an Irish company called Fexco, who are the kind of world leader in dynamic currency conversions. They do a lot of kind of fintech and payments around the travel industry, and they've opened up a division in there called Pace, where they're helping the aviation sector to measure, and then thus be able to manage their carbon emissions in aircraft. So we're certainly seeing a demand for it, or a need for it. And I know, like, in whatever about the United States, in Europe, companies are required to report, and then companies are required to, over a certain size, are required to report on their carbon emissions, and countries are facing fines if they're unable to contain their overall carbon emissions based on certain targets. So I guess it's platforms like your own that would be used to quantify those. Are your clients doing reporting to regulators as well as investors, or with your
Yes,
platform?
so that's part of it. So, for instance, we do data collection for banks in the SFDR reporting framework, right? So that's how banks have to report in Europe on things like their climate performance, or the climate performance of their portfolio, so to better said. And well, the regulation that you mentioned there is a driver, of course, but there you have this changing environment again with the omnibus proposal right now. We see it in Europe that, well, regulation is pulling back. This will require a lot less companies to report. I really think that this is not the right way, because of course in the beginning these companies would have additional, well, efforts to do, for instance, climate modeling and understand, okay, what are the physical and transition risks for my company. But I think in the long run, this information is valuable for these companies, and that can even help them to open new markets, to transition their own business case to a changing environment and so on. So I really think that there's a lot of opportunity as well that's now kind of lost because the regulators are not pushing this forward anymore. But I think this can change again. And I spoke to many company leaders as well. They do it voluntarily because they say, okay, I want to understand the impact that my company has on society, and it benefits me as well on the bottom line.
Yep. And do you feel confident then that to a leader like that you say, look, you don't need to measure all the electricity that you're using or all the flights that you're taking and try and calculate your carbon emission. You say, well, we've got algorithms here. You just give us your financial reports. We'll put them into the machine learning and you're going to get an accurate output that way. Is that the story?
Not really. I mean, in the end, a very good estimate is not the same as an accounting result. Right. I mean,
Yep.
if you do for your company, you wouldn't want to make decisions based on an estimate somebody did, even though it's very likely very good. In the end, you want to have to look into the books and go into detail. And I think that's the same for carbon accounting. But it definitely helps to get first idea, right? For first decision making, to see, especially for companies that have never done this, where do we stand, to do some benchmarking as well with their peers. And so it's really in the early stages, or from an outside perspective as well. And I think that's where it's more interesting. So if a company just doesn't report anything, right? So they're really intransparent. So what do you do? Like if they're seated in India, they are right now not forced by regulation to report. Well, then the best that you can do is to get a good estimate.
Yeah. Maybe you could help the Adani group. I believe they've got some tricky challenges facing them. I think they were importing different grades of coal into India, but and tell me, so what's the what's the challenge? Like, are you kind of keeping a single source policy and kind of licensing the platform, or is it more kind of custom projects that you're engaging with your clients, or is it different between the two parts of your business?
It's until now it's really custom, but we're trying to move more and more into, well, more standardized subscriptions and packages to our platforms and products. But this is a gradual development. We like to work with, well, our clients directly and develop the products kind of with them together, right? Going through to piloting phases and so on. And then we see, okay, can we make a scalable product out of this? Can we maybe develop this together? So as we're still a young company, we are gradually moving from more custom to more standardized.
Great. Tell me, what do you think the future holds in the next, say, 12, 24 months?
Really continuing that pathway. So in the last year, we launched a new platform that we call Athena, which is really an end-to-end solution about corporate sustainability data that really starts from crawling company information to running all these reports and website content and so on through a pipeline where we automatically extract certain data points following standards like GRI and so on, right? So we extract emission like metrics like water consumption and waste generation and the gender pay gap and all these things, right? And then we serve them directly to our clients if they interested in raw data, or we actually deliver them in chat tools, which is basically an analysis tool that we developed, which is it's basically a mix between what's called NLP and NLQ, so natural language processing and natural language querying. So natural language processing, to put in a nutshell, is really working with text, right? So that's what you normally do with ChatGPT, for instance. It accesses text sources and gives you interpretation and results based on that. And
Like
NLQ works a little different.
Would that be like RAG, where you can query a data set?
Exactly. So that's the NLQ part of things, where actually your natural language, like a question, what's the revenue of Oxari, would be translated into an SQL query, for instance, right? That really pulls data from a numerical database. Well, then we package this into graphs and tables and so on. And right now we still deliver this custom to our clients, that they have basically their personalized AI chat tool for their financial and sustainability data. So it's an end-to-end solution, from crawling, data collection, data extraction, harmonization, cleaning, and analysis.
Nice. So I can see that you're using a lot of data and a lot of machine learning. And what are the use cases that you're seeing for GenAI then, in addition to more conventional AI?
So I think that the big chance here is that we really can enhance the way how we do analysis, right? And how we get interpretation of raw data and for instance, large text sources, like automated report creation, right? I think many of the people following this podcast have used ChatGPT to do some summaries, or do enhanced text searches, or even on web searches and all that. So it's really it's a new way of analyzing big amounts of data and getting exactly the result that you needed, and already an analysis and interpretation.
Yeah. And I suppose the user experience then is enhanced, because rather than you writing kind of SQL queries, you're just typing in saying, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And I guess that you guys are making sure that the data sets that the models are trained on have got that data, and that the user is able to get hold exactly of what they're looking for, and that gives a good experience and makes them more productive and creates value in this way.
That's exactly right. And it's really about the context as well that you provide to these models, right? So am I looking for a 20-page report, or am I looking for a 3-sentence response, right? Am I looking for a graph, or am I looking for a table with a short interpretation? And do I want this to be written for a finance wizard, or somebody who has no contact with finance before? So it's really about how do you communicate this with the models, and like accustom them to the user to deliver the data in the right format, in the right way, and make it easier for the user to interact with them.
Brilliant. Great. Well, look, Paul, thank you so much for taking me through what you're doing. It's an exciting area that you're in, and I think you're adding an awful lot of value. Wishing you the best on your journey onwards, and we'll certainly be keeping a track of how that's going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.